Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome. My name is Emma Estienne-Laurie, and I'm the co-founder of Wealth for Impact. And thank you for joining us today. We hope that the next 90 minutes or so will be very well worth your time. Our mission at Wealth for Impact is to empower successful professionals who are managing family-owned enterprises, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit, to create multi-generational impact. And the topic of today's webinar is a central theme in that topic of creating multi-generational impact. In truth, the topic of succession is a very spicy one. There's often a lot of intrigue, there are power tussles, there are personal battles associated with succession. Whether it's, maybe you've probably seen the House of Gucci movie, or the very successful TV series actually called Succession, running now. There are many African dramas. Lionheart is one of my personal favorites. The topic of succession in family business offers a lot of fodder for drama. But today's conversation will focus on none of that intrigue. It will, however, highlight how to get succession right. Unfortunately, there are not enough of these success stories in Africa, but the vast majority of businesses in Africa are family-run businesses. And therefore, for almost every single business in Africa today, there is a unique opportunity for successful succession planning. And I think that's something that we should all be very optimistic about. When my co-founder Ndidi and I were discussing how to position this topic, there was one question that perplexed me. This is not an African problem, right? This is not unique to Africa. This problem is a global phenomenon. But why does it feel so personal to us, even if we don't know the founders? And why does it seem to have a special resonance for us? And I think it's because our post-independence economies are still very young, which means that our indigenous African brands are young. And even so, the consumer experience in Africa really has been turned upside down and around, particularly in the last 20 years. And I would argue for the better. And with that has been the advent of many indigenous brands that have really defined people's childhoods, people's experiences growing up. So when a company fails because at the root there was a failure to plan for succession, it does feel quite personal. And I would argue in the majority of African countries, there are a few companies with what seem like iconic brands that are no longer in existence today. And I think we can all think of a few names. And I think there's a lot to learn from those experiences. And just look around you. The likelihood is that the products and the services that you patronize today won't be around in 20 years. And yes, it's true that many businesses just won't survive changes in technology, et cetera. But there's a bit of that kind of survival of the fittest going on. But for some, and for many actually, the destruction might essentially be self-inflicted. Benjamin Franklin, who was a famous political philosopher and statesman, said, well, he's attributed by saying, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. I'm sure many of you have heard that expression, perhaps from your parents when they weren't doing your homework, but this actually also applies to business succession as well. But let's be honest, the reason why people do not have this conversation is not because they don't think it's important. It's because it can be uncomfortable. The founder or the CEO of your organization has probably put his or her entire being into that enterprise, making tremendous sacrifices. And even imagining the organization without him or her can actually even feel like a betrayal. But the bright side is that it doesn't have to be that way. And this is one of our motivations for establishing Wealth for Impact. Companies can put in place the right organizational structure and governance to avoid the succession challenge. Now, why does this matter? No one wants to see their favorite retail provider close their doors. But even more importantly, it matters because, at least at Wealth for Impact, we believe that we cannot afford this type of value destruction. We need to have enterprises in Africa that are going to thrive well beyond their founders and into the second and third and fourth generations. Now, this is how the private sector in Africa can thrive so that it can really drive the sustainable and the inclusive growth that is required to feed, to educate, to house, and to inspire our young and fast-growing continent. Now, there's absolutely no script for doing this. Every company, every situation is different, but there are some best practices, and that is what we hope you will glean from the conversation today. So before we get started, we wanted to do a little bit of a temperature check, and let's see if this works, to do a little bit of a poll to see what people think about this particular question. And I'm going to put it on the screen, if this works. I'm going to launch the poll, and the question is, in your opinion, and hopefully you all can see this, in your opinion, what are the benefits of the top 3 benefits of effective succession planning? But just choose 3. There are no right answers here. Every management consulting firm or every business magazine has extolled the virtues of succession planning. So there are lots and lots and lots of benefits. But we just wanted to get a little bit of a temperature check from this group. So they have 6 options there. Choose 3 that really resonate with you in terms of being the top 3 benefits. And this, by the way, is also extraordinarily helpful for us at Wealth for Impact, because a lot of what we are going to be doing is research to really help inform the type of resources and services that enterprises need in order to best prepare themselves for multi-generational impact. So let's see where we come out on this. I'll give you another couple of minutes to put in your responses, see where we are. Great. Again, there are no right answers here, just perspectives. And we also recognize that your responses to this will reflect very much where you are in the life cycle of your business. So your answer today might be very different than your answer 5 years ago, and very different from your answer 5 years from now. So it has a lot to do with context, but it's always useful to get a sense of how people are viewing this topic. And then also, as we think about how we can support enterprises, what we should really focus on. Fantastic. See if there are any more responses coming in. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that, and then all right. So let's see if I can share the results so you can have a sense of what that looks like. Actually, you know what? I'm going to share these a little bit later towards the end. I think that'll be the right time to do it. So I will share the results toward the end of the conversation today. Thank you for weighing in. And I also want to get a sense of whether or not some of that changes as you listen to the conversation today. For those of you that are on Twitter, our handle is @WealthForImpact. Our hashtag is Groom Your Successor. So please share your thoughts and your ideas there. Please do drop any nuggets of wisdom and any questions in the chat during the panel discussion. We will tackle them either during the Q&A or even during the session through the live chat. And so we do want this to be a very dynamic conversation. So please do weigh in. Again, there are no right answers here, only opinions and lived experiences. So now we'll move on to the panel. Ndidi Nuneli is my co-founder at Wealth for Impact. She's the author of several books on leadership and business, and she's a successful, passionate serial entrepreneur. Please check out her recent TED Talk on the future of food systems, which features Africa quite significantly. If you haven't seen that yet, it's a new one published on TED Talk. Ndidi and I have a shared passion for the power of business and the need for better business leadership in Africa so that business can actually help to transform lives. And so I will now turn it over to Ndidi to go ahead and introduce the panel. Welcome, Ndidi.
Thank you so much, Emma, and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us. We have assembled a phenomenal panel, and I'm so excited to learn from their wealth of experiences. We have 4 amazing panelists. Nisa B. Guttridge. Nisa is the executive chairperson of Guttridge Consumer Products. She has been a key architect in Guttridge strategy and transformation in the last 15 years. She's the chairperson of Teach for India and sits on the board of many, many companies. She has a BSc from the Wharton School and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. We have Eddie Brown, who is the regional chief executive officer of Francophone Africa, overseeing Prudential Beneficial's business in Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, and Togo. He has a wealth of experiences in financial services and has spearheaded the growth of many companies. Previous experience in investment banking at Motown Records, and has 3 degrees from Harvard. There's a trend here, you can see. Yewande Zacchaeus is definitely one of our leading businesswomen in the Nigerian context, the founder and chairman of Eventful Limited, a leading events planning and consulting company in Nigeria, one of the mothers of the events industry in our country. She started in law, worked in banking, has degrees from Cambridge, and is also one of the founding trustees and past chairpersons of WIMBIZ, Women in Business and Management. She's co-authored many books and won many, many awards. Her bio is long and extensive. And our 4th panelist, last but not least, is Neil Hart. He has a diverse experiences in leadership and organizational management, in branding, communications for over 20 years, and now serves as the lead at Mergon Foundation, which is an incredible ministry that partners across Africa and the Middle East. And he's just written a book, which he'll be telling us a bit about, called The Magnificent Exit. So I am just privileged to have such a distinguished panel made up of amazing individuals who have a wealth of experience on this topic. And I'm really grateful that they've given us their time today to share with you all. So I'm going to kick off with Nisa. And Nisa, you know, I am privileged to serve on the board of Guttridge. And I actually have to say that my work in succession started because I was inspired during my time at HBS. Started HBS in 97, India's 50th anniversary. And in every cubby hole, there was a magazine, 100 Indian companies over 100 years old. And I was like, wow, 100 Indian companies over 100 years old. I wonder how many Nigerian companies are over 100 years old. And that's what kickstarted some of our work at LEAP and the books we subsequently wrote, only to now have the pleasure and privilege of serving on the board of one of India's leading companies that has a footprint across Africa, and truly a dynamic family, a dynamic board. So just tell us a bit about your entrepreneurial story, your family's entrepreneurial story, and what strategic decisions, norms, and values have shaped this multi-generational success and impact.
Thanks for having me here, indeed. It's a pleasure to be with you. So Godrej is actually 125 years. We like to say young, but it is 125 years old, and it is a group of companies. So the company that we work together on is one of the companies. And the group actually started, and if you say what is important or why have we probably survived these 125 years, I think the story of purpose is very strong, both in the family and it runs through the way the business is run. And Godrej actually started in Gandhi's Swadeshi, Make in India movement. So that was the original. Most of our profits at that time went back to India's freedom movement. Currently, over about 24% of the group is owned in a philanthropic trust. So I think that the whole purpose piece is very strong. I think the other piece that's been really strong tied to this purpose is this idea of trusteeship of wealth. So it's not that you actually own anything, but you build the company, or you hold it in trust for the next generation, and not just next generation of family, but there has to be a broader thought than that. I think in more recent years, probably started by my father, I think one thing that we've done very successfully is to professionalize. So actually all the CEOs of the business are professionals, and to be professional. So, I think the expectation from family members is that you conduct yourself in a very professional way, that you deserve to be there, not just from your last name and by your first name also. And then I think over the years, what's also worked is there's been quite clear demarcation of who does what. And if I may, I know indeed we're supposed to, we have survived 125 years, but there's also a lot of gaps in our system. And, this whole demarcation. So if you run this company, then no one will interfere and you do it. It has its downsides also, because when there's not performance, there's also been a lot of hiding behind, like you think you're hiding behind your values, correct? That we shouldn't shake it up or we shouldn't push back. So, we can talk about our best selves, but I think in some of these conversations, it's more all families have problems and all family businesses certainly have problems. So I think discussing that also is very important. So I actually think the process of the demarcation worked well till a certain till for a number of years till it didn't. So I think that's what I'd share for that question.
Fantastic. Thank you for your honesty. I mean, one of the things I have been truly inspired by being on your board for the last 5 years is just how the family works together, multi-generational family members in the same room. When we think about that in the African context, Nisa, it's amazing, right? That your father, your uncle, your siblings are in the same room with independence, and there's a healthy dialogue and debate. You're not kind of cowering to anybody, right? And you're a female chairperson. Just from your own personal experience, what led you to actually say, okay, I'm going to join the family business? And how have you navigated those roles to now become, a chairperson of one of the...
Yeah, I think I drank that story. I drank the Kool-Aid. It's like you're going to change the world and it's going to be all white. That's, there's nuggets of truth there. But I think my dad used to take us to the campus every Saturday. So I've been there since I was a kid. I think it's because I knew no better. And later on, my father always said no one else would hire you. So I think that's how I landed up in the business. But indeed, I don't think I would want my children now to work in the business. So I think that will be a shift. Maybe not at least in the core companies, correct? If they wanted to start something, how could we support them? But, I think now the journey is to just fully professionalize.
Interesting. And just tell us a bit about your Africa journey. Why the big bet on Africa, and what's your vision for your business in Africa? Because I love your brands here, and I just would love for you to share that.
Thank you. So Anidi, as you know, we actually came into Africa by buying a company in South Africa called Kinky, which was a hair extensions company. Unfortunately, that company and brand is shut down. So, so obviously we didn't do something right there. But through that, we then bought a hair color brand called Inecto, which is a big hair color brand in South Africa. And then we went ahead and bought a brand we bought a brand called Darling. And so we're doing a lot of hair care products across Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, some of the smaller countries also. And also we're building out things like household insecticides, which actually is our main business or our biggest business in India and Indonesia and the other countries we operate. I think the opportunity, on the continent, especially in the bigger countries like Nigeria and South Africa, is that they have similarities to India in terms of that you need, very good high reach distribution. You need high quality, low cost products. And and we can deliver those products with a very sustainable footprint also. So I think when you think about that in terms of customer and distribution, there's a lot of stuff that we can apply to the country. I think what we didn't, we've been there for over 10 years now, and we still struggle sometimes because there are the similarities, but there are also quite a few differences. So, if you talk about governance or other things, as you know from the board, it's a work in progress in terms of, because these have been acquisitions and not, what our India business was, which was organically grown.
Thank you, Nisa. I mean, it's truly exceptional that, a company born in India would expand outside India, have a global footprint, and also invite non-Indians to serve on your board. And that's, for me, is a key lesson as well in succession as you professionalize. Think about the markets you're entering, think about who should be on the board, and think about how to ensure that diversity and that inclusion, which I think Gottridge has done very well. We're definitely going to come back to you with more questions, but let's move on to Eddie. Eddie, 3 degrees from Harvard, multiple careers. Just tell us about your own family's succession experience.
Hi, thank you, and it's a pleasure being here. I have an older brother and an older sister, so me being in the business was somewhat accidental. I had just gotten my MBA from Harvard. I worked for Motown Records. I was living in Los Angeles and New York. And my dad, I guess, had different plans, and he flew out to LA from Abidjan to recruit me, which I thought he was just coming to, have dinner and let's hang out for a couple of days. But it was actually a recruiting trip. And he offered me, a package that I couldn't say no to, basically. I mean, it blew away anything that I had at Motown. And so I came to Abidjan and started working for maybe 3 or so years. Then there was a coup the first couple of coups in Côte d'Ivoire, and I decided to leave. I had just gotten married, and I was like, I just didn't feel like dealing with the gunshots every day, and I left. And then a few years later, but I stayed on the board. So I wasn't in management, but I stayed on the board. So a few years later, I went to Cameroon for a regular board meeting. It was supposed to be a 2-day trip. I had just sort of jeans and a shirt. I didn't even have a suitcase. I came in, he had the board meeting. During the board meeting, he surprised everyone and said, I'm retiring and Eddie's the new boss. And literally that's kind of how it happened. And I was just thrown in the deep end. He went off to Asia, and at the time, it was difficult to reach him. So he sort of disappeared for a couple of months and just left me with all this stuff, right, going on. And I just had to sort of figure it out. So I was in Cameroon. My sister was in Togo. My brother at that time was in Côte d'Ivoire. We all had equal shareholdings, but everything was sort of cross shareholdings, right? So we had some family issues. My brother decided to break away. And so the deal was he would keep Côte d'Ivoire 100%, but he would give up his rights and everything else. And so the family, the group split at that point, and everyone was going along, fine. The Côte d'Ivoire company that my brother was running at the time fell into some troubles. The regulator took it over, and so I bought it out of the, from the regulator, reunited the group, restructured the shareholding, and kind of here we are. I make it sound quick, but it took a long time, and it was very stressful and difficult. And so we then, of course, my father was still around at the time, we did a deal with Prudential, and that's why today Prudential is a majority shareholder in our company. So that's kind of how it happened.
Amazing story. Wow. We have to write a case study on you, Eddie. that experience, what are some nuggets, if you had to share 2 or 3 nuggets with this audience? Because they're like, wow, my kids, will they still talk to each other? What are 2 or 3 nuggets you share with us on how to do succession right? Because your father kind of compelled you into this room.
I think there are sort of 3 things. So first, he didn't care about whether you were male or female, right? Or whether you were the oldest or the youngest, which unfortunately still in Africa, people think about the oldest boy, all of that stuff. So my father didn't care about that. As long as you were competent, you know, loyal to the business, to the family, that's what he cared about. So I think that was the first thing. I think secondly, he had a laser focus. So even regardless of what happened, he kept the main thing being the main thing, which was the business and the health of the business. And thirdly, I think, you know, there's a word called relational capital. So I grew up in the business like Nisa, you know, my first job was in the archiving room in the basement when I was probably 12 or 13 years old. So I've been around the business my entire life. So people knew me, but him being there, when I became CEO, he was still chairman for 10 years. So it was important that people saw me in a different way, and he sort of helped in that process, right? So there was a 10-year transitional process where he was there, and that was very helpful. So I would say those are sort of the 3 nuggets I would give.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eddie. And thanks for sharing so honestly about the difficulties and also the blessings associated with this. Now I move to Yewande, who at the height of your business success decided to find a successor. And for those who don't know, you know, the events industry in Nigeria has come full circle, and now it's a fully well-established money-making industry. And you are one of the pioneers in this industry.
Yes,
so tell us a bit about why you decided to step out of the CEO role and how you're navigating that succession.
Thank you very much, Ndidi. Can you hear me? Yes, excellent. Thank you. Yes, I started the business in 2002 after 18 years in corporate law and banking. And, you know, obviously when I started, succession was not really top of my mind, but building a sustainable business was. But why did I step out after 19 years of a successful business? I think, first of all, the events business is extremely demanding and very, very time consuming. And whilst I enjoyed it very much, as an entrepreneur, I actually had so many other things I felt I could do. There were so many other giftings I wanted to experience. And I knew that I couldn't really combine them if I was still in the CEO saddle. So that was one reason. Secondly, I knew that as you said, I was a pioneer in the business, and I sort of felt I had a responsibility, because when the events business started, it was very unstructured. People wondered, why would somebody who was a lawyer and a banker and a DGM in a regional bank give up all that to start this business? And I think I felt I owed it to myself and to the others who had come into the business to show that this was a sustainable business, and this was a business that could outlive the people who had started it. And I thought that it was important that I begin to set the structures and put everything in place to be sure that the business would outlive me. That was one of the reasons. And I think the third reason also was halfway down the line, about 10 years down the line, I had a group of young women who I felt were the people who I was grooming to be the leaders, which I would take one of them to eventually succeed me. But one by one, each of them sort of went their different ways. And of course, I was so disappointed at first that how can this happen? And, I was wondering, how would I go forward? But I spoke to my sister, who was NC of Accenture, because I thought, oh, this is a problem of a small business. And she said, no, this happens even at the highest level. So don't worry, just stick your feet in, begin to look at the next level. And that's what I did. I just decided that let me look at the middle management and begin to see who would be a likely successor, begin to groom them. And because I knew also that if I didn't let them know that an opportunity for them to, have a leadership role in the company, I would again invest so much time and resources, and then they would not stay. So those, I think, were my key reasons for exiting at that time. I was ready and it was time.
Fantastic. Now, In terms of stepping out of the limelight, we found that this is one of the biggest challenges you have when you're moving on, because people will still call you and say, oh, I have a wedding, I have a funeral. Why weren't you there? I engaged Eventful. How are you building a new identity and really handing over the reins in your lifetime? Obviously, you sit on the board, but how are you gradually shifting those responsibilities and the rewards to the team?
You're absolutely right. Especially when it's a service industry, people think you are the business. It is very, very hard to separate yourself from the business. So I had to very early on in the business make a very deliberate attempt to push the brand Eventful rather than the name Yewande Zacchaeus, because people tend to want to relate to Yewande Zacchaeus because they know you, they know your personality. But I think because I was an unusual entrepreneur in Nigerian terms, because I was an entrepreneur that came in from a very corporate background. So for me, it was very, very important that I pushed the brand rather than my personality. And how did I do that? I also made sure that, and you're right, even last night, I had a call from somebody who wanted me to handle her husband's funeral, who did not even realize I've been retired for 18 months, almost 18 months. And in our culture, it's hard to break with that. It's hard to say to them, no, I'm no longer there. So what you do is, yes, you talk to them, have that first conversation, and then just hand them over very politely to the people who are in charge. And it's just a very continuous, deliberate effort. People find it very hard to understand that word retirement in our culture. And I have been able to do that by just pushing forward the brand, ensuring that my staff are empowered, ensure that wherever I go, I'm, championing them. I'm telling people, oh, they can do it. Even when I'm at events, I sit totally, I have nothing to do with it. Make sure that they can see that they're running the show, and it's working. Slowly but surely, people have realized that this is a brand, and it's no longer about Yewande, and she has gone. And it's working somehow now.
Terrific. We'll come back to you with some follow-on questions, and I'm going to invite the audience to please start typing in your questions into the Q&A box, where so many phenomenal insights so far. We have a 125-year-old business. We have a very successful second generation, even going into a global partnership. And then we have an 18-month succession. So you have the full spectrum of experiences on display. And now I'm going to move to Neil. So Neil, you've just written a book called The Magnificent Exit, which actually, when I heard about this, I said, Neil, you have to be on this panel because you've interviewed 25 CEOs about their succession. Why did you write that book? And what are some key insights that you drew from that book that you think our audience could enjoy and also resonates with some of what you've been hearing from the other panelists?
Yeah, thank you, Didi. It's wonderful to be with you all. Transitions has been something that has interested me. I started a business when I was 25 years old, and it's now sort of close to 30 years old. And so at some point I had to step out as a founder, and stepping out as a founder is a particularly difficult thing, as we've just heard. But at the same time, the role that I stepped into was taking over from another founder in a large multinational organization. So I was experiencing the tension of stepping out and trying to create legacy in my own business, and stepping in to really understand what it meant to build on foundations that had already been laid. And so I really had these two things. And actually what I experienced during that time was my transition of stepping out didn't go so well. The CEO struggled for probably 18 months. And so there was a time where I was actually still running the old organization and running the new organization. And so I really felt the pain of that. And so that's where I really began to get interested in how do we do this well? So this is really hard, guys. This is not something that we can take lightly. And every leader who's leading something at some point has to realize that they're not going to be leading that anymore. And somebody else is going to be leading it. And then, in the current role that I'm in, I work with probably 150 different nonprofit organizations throughout Africa and the Middle East. And at any given time, there are 10 transitions taking place that I've got view of. And I began to see the value erosion that happens during transitions. And this is a massive thing for us in Africa. I think typically, and let's stereotype for a moment, we have this A-type leader who's leading and is charismatic and creates wealth, creates a certain amount of impact, but then just can't let go of the reins. And so when we look around the world, what are our examples? Our examples are celebrity leaders, and celebrity is one of the hardest things to transition from. You can't take over from a celebrity. It's just one of the hardest things. And the chances of failure is very, very high. And so, I wrote the book based off of that. And it was one of those things that has been really fascinating for me over time. So a lot of what I'm hearing people saying is very important, that we consider how to lead lightly, how to consider who the best leaders are. So we've spoken about professionalize. It doesn't have to be the eldest. It's got to be the best person to take over. And then the one thing I probably would add into that is leadership pipelines. We haven't spoken about succession planning as being something that leaders really need to focus on very, very well. And if we realize that we are always one leader in a generation of leaders, and that our organization will most likely predate us if we're not a founder, and will continue after us if we hand over, then we have a particular role to play. And it's a small role. It's not actually as big as we realize it is. And if we lead that time in the organization exceptionally well, and we hand over exceptionally well, then we can create long-lasting impact in the generations.
I love that. I love the deliberate, conscious efforts. First, recognizing that you're just part of a journey. And if we really believe that our companies are going to be 125 years, we are just part of a journey, and that consume. But what are some tips on this succession planning journey, Neil, that your 25 CEOs shared? How did they plan for their succession, pick their successor, and pass it over?
Yeah, great question. I found there were sort of 4 inflection points, which is where things go right or go wrong. So I'll mention them and I'll just unpack it very briefly. So the first is getting the right mindset for the person who's going to be handing over. So the leader has to have the right mindset. The second is getting obviously the right person or the right people. And the third is getting the timing right. You can have the right people, right mindset, wrong timing, and you destroy it. And then the last part is taking the team with you in the transition. So, I think the first thing with getting the right mindset for the leader is the humility to know that I am or was not the most important leader in this entire organization. And I think many of us as leaders, we struggle through the challenges of ego, getting the generational mindset piece in. And then I think the identity, because many leaders struggle with identity when they hand over. I heard a story the other day of someone who handed over 6 months later, and they were introducing themselves to somebody, and they introduced themselves as the CEO of the company that handed over 6 months ago. The identity was so invested in who they had been that they carried that identity with them. And so insecurity breeds, when we do handover, and we've got to recognize that, and we've got to plan for it. We've got to get our mindset right. Getting the right people, that's the point of consistent grooming. Your successor is being groomed, whether you're grooming them intentionally or whether somebody else is grooming them, but your successor is currently out there somewhere, and they will be ready at some point to step in. And so, one of the things I saw with these different interviews I did was that many people picked one successor, and in many cases that one successor didn't work even prior to the transition. And so it seems to me, and although this is more art than science, there's no perfect solution, is that we actually need to pick from a number of people and actually groom 3 people, 5 people in a sort of a semi-casual way of doing it until such time as we really do realize that we've got the right person. And then timing, it's very hard to say anything on timing, but timing is the trickiest thing, and getting the right timing is, again, it's an art to get the right timing. And you can do all 3 of those without taking the team with you and with the new leader, handing off to the new leader, and you create a lot of uncertainty. So how do we create certainty for the team that's moving forward when we step out?
I love it. I love it. The magnificent exit. Lots of insights. And it really resonates with the first book we wrote at Leap on this, called Defying the Odds, Case Studies of Nigerian Companies That Have Survived Generations. And then we also wrote another book called Passing the Baton. And it's amazing how, this is such a difficult issue and we often take it for granted. So I'm going to come back and do a rapid fire, and I'd like all of you to kind of address the same question. But first, starting back with Nisa. Nisa, you made some very insightful comments. I don't want to take on all of them, but one of them that struck me was you wouldn't want your children to take over or come into the family business. But will you still put them through the training that you got? Because both you and Eddie have talked about the value of that training shaping who you were. And because in an African context, so many people say, I'm leaving the company for my children. I want my children to be involved in some way. What insights would you give to those listening as to how to involve their children? So Nisa and Eddie, if you can take this on in quick succession.
Yeah, I think we're too many family members and we'll be in the 5th generation. So I think it's unsustainable. Correct. And you can professionalize, you can put all the systems in place, but it's hard to get these particular groups of people where they have ownership also. So I think it's to judge who is that one family member who's best becomes harder and harder, I think. So I think the simplest way is to say everyone step out. I think Ndidi, my daughter's 5 and she wants to be an artist. So great, great, be an artist. You have that opportunity, do that. I think if they want to be in business, obviously, it's education, resources, you can mentor them, but I don't think they have to, come into the company to learn. There's lots more opportunities. And I think I think if they want to be in business, then best they be entrepreneurs, correct? And they have then their parents or the group's resources to help back them up. But why bring them in to the main companies? And I think this, if someone had told me this 20 years ago, don't be ridiculous. This is, I was born into this family. This is what I'm supposed to do. But I'm already telling them that, correct? Like, you won't work with me. So there's no expectation.
So do you think that's unique to you because you're now in the 5th generation, or you would even say for entrepreneurs? Because we have many entrepreneurs on this line.
If you asked me 5 years ago, my thinking was that, it would just continue as a family business, correct? Now, when you're in the driver's seat and you have to plan succession, Ndidi, I'm very much here because of nepotism. And, I do think I have some, good points also. But I think and I'm not saying this for all businesses, correct? Because it depends which generation, it depends on the complexity. But I think with our level of complexity, it's best to separate ownership and leadership out, and then how ownership, maybe there can still be some board positions or whatever, we can figure that out. My thinking wasn't there, but now sitting in, oh God, we'll have to plan it for the next generation. My thinking has shifted over the last sort of 4 or 5 years.
Okay, very helpful. Eddie, do you agree or disagree? What's your perspective from your vantage point?
I agree, actually. Unless there's someone in the next generation that shows the willingness and competence, I think it's best to leave it to the professionals. So that's one of the reasons we joined Prudential. There's something called the Emerging Leadership Program, which basically looks across the group. It's not just us, it's all throughout Africa and Asia, and identifies sort of the next leaders and puts them through the process. So among those people, then we can pick people to lead our companies. So it widens the talent pool. Just because someone's last name is Brown, it doesn't mean they need to, run our company. We can be owners and enjoy the fruits of the shareholding, but we don't need to be the person on the front lines.
Fantastic. And how do you maintain these relationships with your siblings? Eddie, I'm particularly interested in your almost contentious ownership structure. Are you still friends today? And if not, how is it structured?
My sister is on the board of a couple of the companies, so we still work together all the time. My brother is no longer part of the group, so We are friends. There was a period where we weren't. We were estranged, but we have come back together now, and everybody's okay.
Wow.
But
and
it's
that's
tough.
a price. It's tough. That's often a price with succession, especially when it's a family business. And oftentimes I've seen families that don't even talk to each other anymore, and other families that have managed to have very, very good working relationships. Business is business, pleasure is pleasure. You know, this is tough. Neil, what did you find just quickly on this in your book about how people have managed family relationships and business relationships before we come to Mrs. Z?
Yeah, I would throw my hat in with what's been said. I think the big thing is who's the best successor. If we're thinking generationally, if we're thinking about creating value for years to come, we just can't think about passing it on to the most natural family member. But let me say that family sometimes carries the values more strongly than anybody else, and so sometimes family is the right person to move it into. So I've seen it both being family and not being family. I don't think there's a big difference, but I think to have a principle that says it must be this way or must be that way, I think that can get us into trouble, because some of the organizations I work with 5-6 generations in, and at some point they refer back to generation 3 and how they almost lost the business because that family member just wasn't right. We hear that a fair amount, but that happens across the board.
And Mrs. Z, you chose not to engage your children. Do they have a seat on the board? Do they have ownership? How have you structured that differentiation between ownership and management?
No, not yet. They don't have a seat on the board yet. And ownership is really just myself and my husband. But then essentially whatever I own will eventually go down to them. Now, in terms of ownership and management, one thing that was very clear to me was that to be able to have a succession plan that would work, clearly, I had to ensure that the people who were going to be leading the company would have a part of the company. So one thing I did, even before I left, I treated them as owners in that the numbers were open to everybody, from the youngest person in the company to the most junior to the most senior. We'd have a strategy retreats. Everybody would see what the numbers were. And also, when things were good, they got generous bonuses, so they felt that part of commitment as if they were part owners. And then, of course, having left the company, I gave the 3 most senior people shares in the company, because that is the only way that I know that they would have that commitment to stay. And the plan is, as we grow, you get more of the shares until it becomes something that is around even. And I think the reason why, even though both my children are actually the entertainment to be part of the company. We talk about it informally. I mean, they give me ideas, we talk through things, but they don't feel that that this is something they must do, that this is something that they have to do for the family. And I think also because, my father tried to bring my brother into his company and it didn't work. So I realized that it is not always that it has to be a family member that you hand over to. And I think that surprised a lot of people, that I was going to hand a business that I had run for 19 years and I was essentially the main owner to somebody who was not a family member. But at the end of the day, it was about getting the right person who could drive the business, who could take it to the next level and ensure that it was sustained.
Fantastic. I'm still inviting questions. I have lots more questions, but please don't be shy. I know a lot of people don't want to put questions because they don't want to be identified. You can put anonymous in the Q&A box if you pose a question about a succession challenge or your plans for succession or issues you're facing. Another question I have for the panelists while we gear up for questions from our audience, as you reflect on the issue of governance, in your succession planning process, what role does the board have to play in this? And how has the board helped or hurt or guided you as you have navigated succession? In your case, Nisa, obviously you've professionalized and you've brought in an independent board. How involved is that board as you groom your CEOs for your company and for the group's companies?
I think the board, NDD, is very key, and I think it's, we are a publicly limited company. We trade on the stock exchange, so there are certain rules also that you have to follow. But I think making sure that you have strong independent directors is one critically important thing, correct? Where they do really have an independent voice and will push you. And, even in this CEO succession that we just had, during COVID, we had a professional CEO, then I was CEO just during COVID for a couple of years, and we brought someone in. The independent directors met the person. He actually came through. So the funny thing is, a lot of our senior leadership has come through independent directors' recommendations, and, they know them. So I think it becomes a critical. Your independent directors can help you ratify, but they can also provide the network. So I think it goes both ways. And I think you must use we use our independent directors a lot on talent.
Thank you. And Ed, did you agree with this? Have you leveraged a board? Do you have a strong board at the moment? Obviously, you're part of a multinational now, but how are you managing that?
Yeah, so what's interesting is, so before we did the deal with Prudential, we had an all-family board, and now we have a board with Prudential people and independent directors. And the difference is, it's stark, right? I mean, in terms of the leadership and the performance, what we have now is, it takes us so much further and prepares us for so much more than when it was just, my dad and my sister and me, basically. So I would say the board is essential. In fact, probably the most critical role belongs to the board in terms of transition and planning going forward. So you have to make sure you have the right people on that board.
Definitely. I'm a big believer in boards and have written books about this, but many people are skeptical about boards. They think it's an additional nuisance. And I actually believe you can't have an effective succession without a board. And what's your experience been around your board?
No, absolutely the same. Like for me as well, it was a family board before the succession, but just at the time I was going to exit, I realized I needed to strengthen the board, and I brought in two people who the value they have added. One of them is a lawyer, but an expert in corporate governance. The other one is also a lawyer, but he's an expert in events and entertainments, worldwide, not just located to Nigeria. And I think that in the 16 to 18 months we've been working together, the strategic direction they've provided, the networks, the balance, and it's just been fantastic. I actually wished I had done this earlier, and I think it is absolutely really, really important for the board has a really, really important role to play during the transition, and it has really, really helped to make our transition smooth. And as you know, for us, my transition came at the time just after COVID, which was a very, very difficult time for events companies. Our businesses were totally thrown out for over 12 months. So in fact, I was really worried that should I still do this transition at this time, because it seemed to me that I would be handing the poor gentleman a poison chalice, so to speak. But so much had gone into the preparation for the transition. We decided to still go through with it, and with the help of the board and all the plans we have made, it's gone very well indeed. So I agree with them.
Awesome. And I'm going to ask, we're now getting quite a few questions in the Q&A box, but before I go to that, I'm going to ask you, Neil, when we wrote our book, Defying the Odds, we noticed 3 inflection points in the succession planning process. When the founder steps down, when the next generation comes in, when the founder exits, and when the founder dies. Did you notice that in your interview process? So as you interviewed and through your own experiences, and how would you advise those listening? How can we surmount some of those obstacles, those inflection points that can actually derail a succession?
Yeah, great question. I didn't interview any dead founders, so I can't comment on them. But I think it comes back to your earlier question, actually, because the board is so important in inflection points. So because a board doesn't have as much as close view of the organization as the executive team does, the board, because it's at a different level, gets to look across and has perspective and can think around longevity. And so inflection points are the things that can circumvent longevity. That's when things go wrong. And often the way a CEO or the executive team operates in those cases is in crisis. So they deal with crises, whereas board should not deal with crises. It should be looking across. And so, I think it's really the inflection points you've spoken about, and the question around board is actually that's part of the same solution. A board is really, really important to help an executive team through those crisis points or inflection points in order to have longevity.
Terrific, terrific. Now we're going to go to the questions. Marius has a question. When you're just starting out in business, how do you groom your kids to love the business or to be ready to take over? Maybe you can answer this, Eddie, because obviously somehow in there, deep down in your heart, while you're at Motown, you still love this business.
I loved my family, right? And I respected my parents. And the way my dad, when he recruited me, the way he positioned the offer was very interesting. So he said, anything you want to do, you can do through this company, right? So if you make this company successful, whatever it is you want to do, you can actually do it through this company. And so I think when he told me that, I said, you know what, that actually makes sense. And that's kind of, one of the main reasons that I came over. And it worked out. And when you're a little younger, you might be a little skeptical, but after a few years, I managed to agree with him and say, wow, he actually was right. And I can do anything, as long as this is successful, anything I want to do, I can do. And so I think it's just how you position it to the kids, but definitely don't force it on them, because it just won't work.
Thank you. Very sound answer. Now, Michael has a question, and I'll ask both Yewande and Nisa to tackle this one. How can you plan succession and ensure, if you're not planning for a family member to take over, that your family will not be schemed out of their ownership and equity? And this is a fear a lot of people have, that they'll wake up one day and find out the business is no longer theirs. What assurances can they put in place? What systems or structures? Nisa, I know you talked about a trust. Maybe you can explain that a little more to help people think through how to protect their family's investment and their family's interest.
Can you hear me, Andini? Yeah. So, this is not something that I think we faced with professionals, because, it's a publicly listed company, or even in the private companies, they run with sort of governance. I guess if you have an incoming CEO, like we do in any company, you put limits on the decisions they can make. So obviously, if it's a big M&A decision or a big capital investment decision, the board, you have to say that a board sign off is required. Perhaps, on the top team, you say an interview is required. So you can balance freedom with governance through those processes. You do have to keep an eye and have an idea, maybe perhaps you have the head of audit or someone report to you as you do the transition with the new CEO. So there could also be someone comes in as COO, I'm thinking, in one company, and then you do the transition to CEO over a 2 to 3 year period. So I think there are lots of options. I don't think there's one standard that fits all, right? It will depend on the company or group and family involved.
Thank you. Yewande, what has your experience been in terms of making sure that you don't get schemed out?
Well, I think, obviously my experience is still so short, but basically what I've done is, the agreement between myself and the new shareholders is clear. In fact, even the shares they own, if they're going to leave the company, then they have to offer those shares first back to the company. We have the first right to buy those shares back. So you don't have somebody who maybe after having spent 5 years as CEO and done very well now wants to set up his own company, still have shares in your company. So I think basically the thing is just consider what all the issues could be and have them, properly documented in a legal agreement so that everybody understands that at the end of the day, whilst my desire is to continue to grant additional shares as the business progresses, as the succession plan seems to work, that there will be a limit to where, how much they will own, and that whatever I own, that is what is going to be owned by my family. So I think the best thing is just to not be, to be extremely smart about the, and tying everything up legally before you go into it, which we have more or less done. But I don't think that is a major issue for our company at our stage right now, really.
Fantastic. I love the ideas both you and Nisa have shared around financial transparency, accountability systems and structures, legal agreements, and keeping everything quite tight, building trust over time, and then letting go gradually as the person proves they're trustworthy, which is all part of grooming the successor. Neil, Amma Peters has a question here. How do you create a merit-based career path for family members in the situation where they actually want to be part of the succession process? Is there a skills-based identifier which helps them pitch for desired roles? And what have you seen from your own experiences and the experiences of the companies that you reviewed?
I'm not sure I've got a conclusive answer on that one. My kids, as I really considered them in our succession planning and gave them all the desire for it, but in the end, it was not something that they had wanted. But in the interviews that I did with other leaders, it varied so much. Some people's sons or daughters just shadowed their dad or their mom for so many years that it became so obvious. In one case, one leader who had a multinational organization across, I think they were operating in 90 countries, so very, very large organization. He began grooming when he realized it was nearing his time for handing off. He began grooming five leaders. His son was one of those leaders, and so in that process, he made it very clear to everybody that there was no merit based on family. There was just merit based on the next good successor, the best successor, and held it very lightly in his hands in such a way that he then actually allowed the group of young leaders to identify the next leader, and it happened to be his son. So, I think there isn't a right and wrong way of doing this. Can we instill a desire in our kids or a love in our kids for the business? I think we can do that by not overexposing them, by not underexposing them. And certainly I think merit is always the thing that has to play a role.
And what we've often seen through our research is its values, its skills, its desire, but also you give them tests. You give them a bit of money and say, go and start a new business over there, go and recruit this new customer, and test how they act under pressure, right? And how they deliver. So there are lots of tools that we can pass on to you, Amma and others who have those questions around how to groom and pick successors. There's a specific question here, Yewande, for you. They said you mentioned numbers, which are open to everybody, down to the most junior person. What kind of numbers are you referring to? Does this include salaries? And in what form and frequency you share, such as to rally everyone?
No, I think when I was saying numbers, I was actually saying the numbers of the business, the profitability of the business, because I did that with a very open mind. And I mean, maybe I was actually very naive, because when a couple of consultants came to the meeting, they said, you let everybody see these numbers? And I was, yes, because that's the work we're doing. And then it makes it clear to them, when you say, we're not doing well, so we can't have a salary increase this year, everybody knows that it's true. And, especially in our business, because a lot of money comes in, but a lot of the money that comes into the business is other people's money. So if they don't realize that this is actually not all your money, they seem to think that you're sitting on this pot of gold and you're not sharing it. So for me, it's always been extremely transparent about it. So clearly every penny that the company makes at whatever time. And, it made it easy, because when COVID hit us and we couldn't pay salaries, everybody could understand that, because they knew that we were not earning. Everybody was sitting at home. We could not do any business. So there was no justification for paying full salary. So from myself as CEO at that time to the most junior member of the company, we were all on half salary. And I think when there's that transparency, people understand the way the business is run, and people are able to be, the staff are able to be more, empathetic to the decisions that you take.
I think it also creates shared ownership, and that's a fantastic model that you have built, Yewande. The shared ownership, that transparency and accountability is key. We have a question from Collins. Nisa, I think you can help us with this one. What suggestions do you have to help manage a dynamic family situation if family members have different views on succession, especially when succession is deemed to be late in implementing?
So I think one of the things that we did actually, a lot of the succession planning or what should we do next, our generation actually got together and worked on. And we actually had a outside, a senior advisor help us with putting that together. So I think, if everyone's not agreeing, is there a smaller group that agrees? Can you bring them together and can you put a proposal to? Our proposal failed, by the way, eventually. We thought we almost got it through, but it didn't work out. But I think what I think one of the things that we're not talking about here is that families come with a lot of emotions. Money brings a lot of, parents trying to control children. I mean, I know some horrific stories. So I think the expectation is that, it'll always be the founder who comes up with that succession plan. Sometimes it's not correct. Sometimes someone needs to give them some ideas and some thinking, but you have to make sure that you're not, it's not you promoting yourself to be the next CEO. But if you can get a subset of the family together and think about it in a very structured way, we wrote a 35-page, at least we can feel happy that the paper was beautifully written and apparently very intelligent, but it didn't go through. But I do think that you can do it in a structured way, even if everyone's not agreeing.
And just to push on this question, Nisa, in terms of the external support, would you recommend that very complex families bring in an arbitrator, bring in how would you navigate that?
Yeah. See, I'll tell you, I've seen it work. When I was younger, this outside, I had a Harvard professor who worked with us. I figured that, family members were much more willing to listen to me if I could put like this older, wiser person in front, and as if this was not only my idea alone, correct? I found that when I tried to say this is only my idea and this is what we do, I'd fall flat on my face. So then I became very good at saying, oh, here are the other 4 family members' names on this proposal, and here's the outside advisor. I've done this quite a few times. And I think it helps your own thinking. It creates buy-in. So I do think that's useful. On the other hand, we've had advisors for our family council and stuff who were not effective because they couldn't get under the belly of the issues. So I think the right advisor with the right, if your family is in a mess and you expect then you probably need a set of 10 therapists. I don't think one advisor can, unless there's some miracle worker that I've not met, and please introduce them to me then. But so it depends for what it is. But if things are in a mess, I think it's very hard to get one person, unless they're excellent or something in.
Fantastic. Eddie, you were laughing. What are your thoughts on this issue? And then there was another question for you, Amadi puts in the chat. I thought it would be very relevant to you, given the history of Côte d'Ivoire. Given that Nigeria is facing a huge crisis and a lot of children are leaving. And this individual says, Amadi says that, they thought their children would take over, but they have basically relocated abroad due to the challenges facing the country. What should I do in this type of situation? Can they bring them back? Can they lure them back? What will it take? So you have to question. Your father lured you back after the coups. So please address that, and then try to also address Colin's question around the complexity of families. In some cases, the founder might have passed on, right? And the family's left with this, businesses and divergent interests. How would you suggest they navigate that?
So in our case, the sort of the issues in our family happened when my dad was still alive. And so, you know, together, he and I and my sister, we were together and we could navigate. And once he passed, by the time he passed away, everything was over and everything is clear. And my sister and I now are at the head of the family. Well, I am, with my sister supporting me. The next generation, none of them show any interest at all in insurance at all. So that's another reason why we did the deal with Prudential, because it's, you know, you can't force them. And I've tried talking to them using the same logic that my dad has used. I'm still talking to a couple of them, so maybe things might work out. But you certainly don't want to force them, because it doesn't serve anyone any good. And what was the second one? The negative economic and social. Well, that's tough, right? So because that's a safety issue. Especially at the time I was newly married, my wife had just moved here, you know, and they're shooting and, you know, all that stuff going on every day, and there's a coup or a counter coup or rumors of a coup or what have you. So that's very difficult. And no young person who is well educated and exposed to, you know, to other things would want to be in that situation unless you can convince them that where there's that amount of problem, there is equal amount of opportunity. And if you can use that sort of logic to be like, yes, there are a lot of issues here, but this is where you can come and actually make your mark and find an opportunity, then maybe that might work. But it's a difficult thing.
It's not easy, but you chose to come back, and many of us are still here in spite of it all. So we do believe the opportunities. So we're going to start wrapping up the panel, and I just want to ask each of you for one final word to those listening, the entrepreneurs who are exhausted, right? Like one day they say, I've done my time. I want to start thinking about my succession. What advice would you give them? What is one thing that they should do now to prepare for a successful succession and groom that successor? So let's start with Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Didi. To me, the most important thing is the leadership pipeline. It's hard to raise up the right leader, and we can make a mistake very easily. We can also put someone in place who's not well groomed. And so when we think about grooming, we think about values, because they can have all the skills that they need, but they can have the wrong values. They can take the organization in the wrong direction. So values are really important, and values can only really be tested by spending enough time together. And so one of the things I've learned from wiser leaders than myself is that they invested personal time with the people that they were grooming. In other words, they ate at home. They visited in their homes. They maybe went on holidays together. They made these intentional things happen over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 years, so that they could really identify the values of the people that they were grooming. So I think that's really important. Skills is very, very important, of course. We need people with the right qualifications, and that's why merit is very important. But then, to also accept, and I mentioned this earlier, that if you're picking one person, that person may or may not work out. They may actually come into it and fail. They may step out just at the last minute. I've seen quite a few of those horror stories where, 3-4 months before the transition was about to happen, finally that young leader just puts up the hand and says, I thought it was right, but it isn't. And then you're left with nothing. So for me, the leadership pipeline, both looking at the skills as well as the values, is one of the most important things that we could be doing.
Thank you so much, Neil. Nisa, what would be your parting thoughts?
I think clarity and honesty. So clarity is, at what point is this succession going to happen, correct? Is it age-based at 75? Is there, so you do it before. And then honesty is who's in the pipeline for this, who internally, who externally. Just you have to be really, really clear and what is the criteria. And if you are, sometimes you do go out and you don't have 3 years to bring them into the team and assess them before putting the CEO. I think doing that background check yourself, making sure you go as deep as possible, is I think one thing I've realized is that if they're failing, if the person is failing not because of something in the company, then just make another leadership transition. It sounds crazy, but you can, don't be fearful that I can't make this change because something could go wrong. It's quite likely that something will go wrong, or it could go wrong, but you then have to make another change. So we have to just keep moving forward.
Thank you. Clarity, honesty is critical. Eddie, what is your parting thoughts?
I would say, what's been my North Star is keeping every decision that we make has the customer in mind. And what's the best decision for that customer that you have today and the guy or the woman you're going to have in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. So we sort of stay focused on that, and we're in the insurance business, so it's not we don't make anything, right? So it's really based on a lot of trust. So everything we do, we keep the customer in mind. So what's the best thing for this person who's had a policy with us for 10 years or 20 years? How do we make sure that we live up to that promise when the time comes? So I would say always keep the customer in mind, and if you make the right decision for your customer, everything else will work out.
Put the customer first, always. Thank you, Eddie. Yewande?
Well, being the last to go, they've said everything really. But then honestly, values. Absolutely important that whoever you're going to hand to has the same, hand over to has those same values. Very important. And then an open mind, I think, is extremely important. We've all said it. It doesn't have to be the longest serving. It doesn't have to be the person you like most. Who will do best for the company? You must keep an open mind and be very strategic in your choice of the person who you know can take the company forward. And I think two things that I would really want entrepreneurs, especially those with small businesses, to consider. Are you really ready to let go? You need to really search your mind. Are you ready to let go? You might be tired of all the work and you're exhausted, but you need to be ready to let go. You need to get out of the way once you have handed over. And then I think finally, what I would say is that you have to be ready to part with part of your company. If you're not ready to give those people that you're handing over to a stake in that company, I don't think for the generation that is behind us, I don't think they're going to last very long. So you need to be sure that you're ready to do those things. Those would be
fantastic. I just think we've had a phenomenal conversation today. I have learned a lot, and I'm giving you guys, on behalf of everybody, a round of applause. The insights that you've shared with us, the honesty, the integrity, the vulnerability, unmatched. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us so much to chew on. The entrepreneurs here, many of them called me beforehand and said, I'm struggling with succession. That's why we had this session, because it's like, you should learn from others who have done it. And I started by saying, 100 Indian companies over 100 years old. They're going to be 100 Nigerian companies over 100 years old, because we have Yewande Zaccheaus leading the charge. They're going to be 100 companies in Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, and Benin, and all the countries that Eddie represents. And obviously South Africa, Neil is doing a great job over there and building, not just in South Africa, but across Africa and the Middle East, companies that will survive generations. And then finally, Nisa, thank you. Thank you to you for your leadership. Thank you for being such a pioneer in your space. And thank you for sharing your wealth of experiences and believing in the African continent. We look forward to doing more together with you. Thank you again to this fantastic panel. And I'm going to hand it back to Emma.
Thank you very much. This has been really a fantastic conversation. A number of people we've recorded this so a lot of people can see it and share their lots of nuggets of wisdom that have come out of this. It's just really, really engaging. When I opened, I said that there wasn't going to be much in terms of intrigue. And obviously, family business, again, offers a lot of opportunity for, I think Nisa spoke about it, right? These are people, personalities, there are emotions that can run high. And that's actually what makes this such a fascinating space. So thank you for sharing so honestly about your own personal journeys. And I think those lessons, again, will feed into what everybody else is kind of dealing with. And again, every single situation is different. Every situation is unique, but there are some best practices, and you shared a lot of that with us today. So thank you for that. We did, we did a little poll earlier, so I wanted to share with you the results of that poll, so you can see just a quick one. What people were saying in terms of grooming your successor, the highlights. What are the most important factors that one should keep in mind, or maybe the most important highlights in terms of why you should do effective succession planning. And we have there helping to identify future leaders. It's come out as a number one, and then formalizing the process of knowledge transfer. Those two resonate with me as well. Two aspects where, again, early planning makes a difference. So you can't start these things by doing it at the last minute. So knowledge transfer, and also identifying future leaders. And that might speak to also some of the demographic that we have as the audience today. I actually thought that preserving brand integrity and reputation would be higher. But it's useful to see that is, people are feeling very strongly around the fact that it's important to really nurture the future leadership. And I think a lot of you talked about the challenges of that. It is not something that comes easily. It's not obvious. And also, I think Nisa spoke about this, is that it shouldn't necessarily be expected as well. Everybody will have their own journey and their own path, and all you can do is have those conversations. Listen, it's hard to have takeaways from a conversation like this because there are many, but a few things kind of, for me, stood out. And I just wanted to emphasize them. And you can have your own takeaways as well. But professionalizing the business and merit being first, right? That came across very strongly. A laser focus on the health of the business. And if you focus on the health of the business, then you can put competency first, and you can focus on things that matter. So those two things I think really fit together. And then for founders in particular, having a deliberate effort, and Yewande talked about this, to push the brand beyond the personality. And I think that's very important for founders, the brand beyond the personality. And, when do you start to, because of course in the early years, the personality is important, but at some point one has to make that deliberate effort to really push the brand beyond that. And then getting the following things right: the mindset, people, process, timing, bringing everyone along in that process, and an emphasis on values, and really focusing on all those things as you go along the process of succession planning. And then also, every business is different, right? So as complexity increases for the business, then having even more focus on separating leadership and ownership. So again, every single business is different. Every context is different. There is no, single script for this. So one will have to decide what makes sense for your business, where you are in your life cycle, how to have those conversations. I even thought about having a poll question about how do you have a conversation with the founder about succession. I don't know that anybody has the script to do it. And in Eddie's situation, his father had the conversation with him by just throwing him in the deep end. So it can happen in a variety of different ways. There's no perfect way to do it. But I think what's very clear is that it's oftentimes going to be an uncomfortable situation. But the earlier you do it, the better off all of it will be. So again, thank you all for participating in this conversation. What we're trying to do with Wealth for Impact is really focus on helping families, and as Ndidi mentioned, families in Africa, family businesses and enterprises in Africa and in the African diaspora, to really go from what is first generation wealth to multi-generation impact. And we recognize that organizational structure and governance are a critical part of this. And we recognize that a lot of this has to do with difficult conversations. And we're really ready to help think about how to do that. We're putting together a whole toolkit of resources for enterprises who would like to just kind of have golden nuggets to think about how to do this for your own organizations. We're working directly with organizations that kind of need that hands-on support. So there'll be a range of resources and services that we'll be offering. And we want to really be informed by those of you who are experiencing this firsthand. This is a living, breathing space that's evolving all the time. There are different needs. So hopefully we can be in a place where we can be responsive, because we very much believe that when we get family enterprise right in Africa, then that sets the basis for our overall conversation around really achieving all of our very ambitious development goals across the continent. So we got to get this space right first. And then with that, many things will follow. So please be in touch with us. Happy to talk to you about any questions or comments you might have. Thank you for participating. Again, this will be online. And please do share it with any of your family and friends who might be preparing for a succession or struggling with even having the conversation, and recognizing that everybody struggles with it and everybody finds it uncomfortable, but a lot of people have had some success. So hopefully you've gotten some of those golden nuggets from this conversation today. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Yewande. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Nisa. Indeed, thank you very much for that excellent moderation. Thank you all very much, and we shall see you next time. All the best. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on where you are. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.